I remember the first time I saw him, a shadow through the downpour, standing still against the wind while everything else moved. The world was trembling under the weight of rain, trees bending like old men, puddles rippling like quicksilver veins across the mud, and there he was, immovable, watching me. That was the moment something cracked inside me, a quiet fracture that felt like both pain and relief. I didn't know it then, but that moment would become a pulse I'd return to, in dreams, in grief, in all the empty places of my mind. The rain had been falling for days that spring. The kind of endless gray that seeps into your clothes, your thoughts, your bones. I'd come to the stables because I couldn't bear the silence of my apartment anymore. The city felt too loud, too full of people pretending to know where they were going. Out here, the noise of the rain was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. My boots sank into the mud as I crossed the yard. The smell of wet hay and earth filled the air, sharp, raw, real. I remember tightening my jacket around me and pushing open the gate. The metal was cold against my palms. There were horses in the distance, their silhouettes blurred by the curtain of rain. But only one stood apart. He was a deep chestnut, though I couldn't see it clearly yet. Tall, lean, but something in his stillness drew me in, like a wound disguised as grace. He didn't move as I approached, didn't flinch. His eyes followed me with that strange, heavy calm that only animals seem to understand, the kind that says, "I know something you don't." I stopped a few feet away, the rain trickling down my face, and whispered, almost without meaning to. "Hey there," he blinked, slow and deliberate. His breath came out in thick white clouds that broke and drifted into the gray air. I could hear my heart beating louder than the rain. Someone behind me shouted, "Careful! He's not used to strangers yet." The voice startled me. I turned and saw a man in a raincoat, an older hand from the stable. Paul, I think his name was. He jogged toward me holding a feed bucket. "That one's temperamental. Rescue horse. You might want to keep your distance until he knows you." But I couldn't step back. Something in his eyes held me there. Not defiance, not danger. It was sadness, vast and unspoken, like an echo of something I knew too well. "What's his name?" I asked. "Storm," Paul said, setting down the bucket. "Fitting, huh?" Storm. The name sank into me, heavy as the rain. I stayed by the fence long after Paul left, just watching him. He didn't move, didn't eat, didn't turn away. Only his eyes flickered, catching bits of the world and reflections of water and sky. I felt like if I stood there long enough, maybe the pieces of my own life, the ones that had scattered in all directions, might find their way back to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain against my window felt like 1,000 fingertips tapping on glass, asking to be let in. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the way he looked at me. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition, as if he'd seen the same emptiness inside himself. The next morning, I went back. It wasn't part of my plan, though I didn't really have one anymore. My life had become a series of half-hearted routines since everything fell apart. Wake up, pretend, breathe, repeat. But when I walked into the stable, the smell of damp straw and horses hit me like a memory I hadn't earned yet. Storm was in his stall this time. The morning light slanted through the gaps in the roof, cutting through dust and steam like silent beams of gold. His coat was darker than I'd imagined, rich, deep, almost red where the sun touched it. He looked stronger up close, but there was a tension in the way he held his neck, a quiet tremor in his muscles, like he was always ready to bolt. I reached out my hand slowly. "It's just me," I whispered, though he didn't know what me meant. My fingers brushed the air between us, a fragile bridge of trust. He didn't back away. His breath warmed my skin. I don't know why, but tears started to rise in my throat, hot, unwanted, relentless. I blinked them away before they could fall. There was something sacred about his nearness, something I didn't want to stain with my human mess. Paul appeared again, leaning against the doorway. "He likes you," he said with a half smile. "I haven't done anything." "That's why?" he replied, chuckling softly. "You're not forcing it. Most people try too hard." I didn't answer. Instead, I stayed there until the rain outside slowed to a drizzle. When I finally left, I looked back and saw him watching me again. That same quiet gaze, as if memorizing something I didn't know I was giving. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself returning every afternoon. It became my ritual. I'd brush his coat, clean his stall, talk to him about things I couldn't say to anyone else. Sometimes I'd just stand there in silence, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Steady, grounding, real. It's strange how quickly the world outside can begin to fade. My phone stopped buzzing as much. My friends, or the people who used to be my friends, stopped asking me out. I didn't mind. I didn't want laughter or conversation. I wanted this. The quiet heartbeat of the barn, the soft clatter of hooves against wood, the smell of rain-soaked hay. Storm started trusting me slowly. The first time he nudged my shoulder with his nose, it felt like forgiveness. The second time, it felt like home. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the scars along his flank, thin, pale lines beneath the glossy fur. No one told me where they came from, but I could guess. Rescue horses don't end up in places like this without a story carved into their skin. I never asked. He didn't need to tell me. We understood each other in the language of silence. There were moments when I'd sit in the stall with him, my back against the wall, listening to the rain hammering the roof. He'd lower his head, his breath slow and deep beside me. In those moments, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel lost. I just was. But healing never comes without stirring the ghosts that made you sick in the first place. One evening, the sky broke open with another storm. The rain came down in sheets, relentless and wild. Thunder rolled over the hills like a promise of chaos. I'd stayed late, later than usual, brushing Storm's mane, whispering nonsense just to hear my own voice fill the space. When the first crack of thunder hit, he startled, eyes wide, muscles tense. His hooves struck the floor, echoing like gunshots in the narrow stall. I froze, heart racing. "Hey, it's okay," I said quickly, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "It's just the sky talking, that's all." "You're okay," but he wasn't listening. He backed against the wall, nostrils flaring, eyes wild. The storm outside raged louder, the wind howling through the gaps in the roof. I could feel the electricity in the air, sharp and alive. For a moment, I saw it. The terror that must have lived inside him for years. Whatever had been done to him, whatever cruelty had shaped his fear, it came rushing back in that instant. And somehow I understood. I stepped closer, slowly, every movement deliberate. "Storm," I whispered, my throat tight. "Look at me." He turned his head just enough for our eyes to meet. Lightning flashed behind him, painting his silhouette in silver. My reflection shivered in his gaze. Small, trembling, human. "It's not going to hurt you," I said, though my voice cracked halfway through. "You're safe here. I promise." He hesitated. Then, with a shuddering breath, he lowered his head slightly. A surrender, or maybe a plea. I don't know which. I reached out, pressed my hand against the side of his neck. His heart was pounding so hard I could feel it through my fingertips. "It's okay," I whispered again. "It's okay." Minutes passed. The thunder moved farther away. The rain softened into a steady rhythm again, like the heartbeat of something forgiving. When he finally calmed, I leaned my forehead against his coat and let myself cry. I hadn't planned to, but the tears came anyway, unstoppable, silent. All the things I'd buried under routines and quiet days spilled out in the space between his breaths. I don't know how long we stood like that, just breathing together, two broken creatures under the same roof, waiting for the storm to pass. After that night, something changed between us. He followed me now, even when I wasn't holding the lead rope. He'd nudge me when I was lost in thought, as if to remind me I was still here. I started taking him out into the pasture when the weather was kind. Watching him run, his mane whipping through the air, hooves striking the ground like thunder-made flesh. Watching him was like watching freedom remember itself, and it did something to me. Something deep and unexplainable. It made me want to believe that maybe I could be free again, too. One morning, as I opened the gate, Paul joined me. "He's come a long way," he said, watching Storm trot across the field. Yeah, I whispered, almost to myself. We both have. Paul gave me a sidelong glance, the kind that sees more than it says. Funny how that works. You rescue them, but they end up rescuing you. I smiled faintly but didn't answer. Words felt too small for what I wanted to say. The clouds had started to part by then, sunlight breaking through in fractured beams. Storm lifted his head toward the light, ears flicking, eyes bright. For the first time, he looked like he belonged to the world again. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. That evening, the rain returned, soft, almost tender, like an echo of everything we'd survived. I stood outside the stall, watching the droplets beat along the wooden beams, the smell of damp hay thick in the air. Storm was calm, his breathing slow and steady. I reached out, resting my hand on his muzzle. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, pressing his nose against my palm. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Maybe neither am I. Outside, the sky hummed, low, distant thunder rolling somewhere far beyond the hills. But it didn't scare me, not anymore, because sometimes healing doesn't come in sudden bursts or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment, a heartbeat shared between woman and horse, under the blanket of rain, when the world finally feels small enough to hold. And as I stood there, the scent of earth and storm all around me, I realized that maybe the rain had never been trying to drown us. Maybe it was just trying to wash us clean. The morning after the rain always smells like truth, like something raw and clean, a new page spread open before the world. The ground was slick beneath my boots as I walked toward the stables, a thin mist rising off the fields in soft ribbons. Every step felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with memory, light with something I didn't dare name. Hope, maybe. Storm was waiting for me at the gate, head bowed slightly, eyes calm. He knew the rhythm of my steps by now. That knowledge, that recognition, it struck me deeper than any word could. I lifted my hand, and before I could say anything, he pressed his muzzle against my palm, warm breath blooming over my fingers. "Morning," I murmured, my voice rough with sleep. "You missed me?" He flicked his ears, snorted softly. It felt like an answer. The world was quiet then. No thunder, no shouting sky, just the sound of his breathing and the faint hum of water dripping from the roof. I let my hand rest on his forehead, tracing the small swirl of fur between his eyes. That spot I'd learned was his anchor. When he grew anxious, I'd press my hand there, gentle but firm, and he'd settle. It worked for me too. The simple touch. The reminder that presence was enough. As I began brushing his coat, the sunlight began to filter through the open doors, touching everything it could reach. Dust motes floated like golden ghosts in the beams. His hair gleamed under it, deep reddish-brown with streaks of fire. I moved slowly, careful not to break the spell of the morning. Paul passed by, tipping his cap. "You're early again," he said, voice half amused. I couldn't sleep. "Storm or the weather?" I smiled faintly. "Neither, just my head." He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. There was something about the people here. They didn't need to pry. They just existed beside you, silent witnesses to your return to yourself. When Paul walked away, I whispered, "We're doing better, aren't we?" Storm's ear flicked back toward me. The corner of his mouth twitched like he was holding back a secret. I finished grooming him, led him out into the pasture. The ground still shone with the wetness of last night's storm. Birds were beginning to find their voices again. The hills in the distance glowed faintly with mist, like smoke rising from some invisible fire. I unlatched the rope, and for a moment he just stood there, hesitant, like he was waiting for permission. "Go on," I whispered. "You can run," and he did. It was like watching the rain turn into motion. His muscles stretched, his mane whipped against his neck, his hooves pounded the earth until the world itself seemed to move with him. I felt it in my chest, the thud of each stride, the pulse of life that refused to stay still. He circled the field once, twice, before slowing to a canter, breath steaming in the cool air. When he turned back toward me, something inside me cracked open again. Not from pain this time, but from the sheer, unbearable beauty of him. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. Later, when I sat on the fence watching him graze, I thought about how fragile trust really is, how easily it's broken, how slowly it's rebuilt. I thought about the people who had once promised to stay, the voices that used to fill my apartment, the laughter that had vanished overnight. Storm had been abandoned too. Different kind of wound, same hollow ache. Maybe that's why I kept coming back, not to save him, but to learn how to save myself. By midsummer, the rain had become something else, softer, more forgiving. The world seemed to breathe easier, and so did I. Storm and I had fallen into a rhythm, our own small world of gestures and silences. I'd talk while brushing his coat. He'd listen, or at least pretend to. Sometimes I'd laugh at my own words, at how ridiculous it was. Me, talking to a horse as if he understood every broken piece of me. But in his stillness, I always found the kind of attention I never got from people. He never looked away when I spoke. Never interrupted. Never judged. There was a moment that summer that stays with me more vividly than any other. A morning when the fog was so thick it felt like we were floating inside a dream. I could barely see the edges of the paddock. The world had dissolved into soft gray. Storm stood near the fence, head lowered. I walked toward him, the grass wet against my jeans, the air cold and heavy with silence. When I reached him, he lifted his head and looked straight through the fog, through me. It felt like standing at the edge of something sacred. "You ever wonder if it's possible to forget where you end and the world begins?" I said quietly. My words hung in the mist, fragile, half real. He blinked, and I swear I saw my own reflection inside his eyes, small, trembling, but whole. That was when I realized I'd stopped thinking of him as an animal. He was something else now, a mirror maybe. A living echo of everything I didn't have words for. I pressed my forehead to his. The warmth of him steadied me. The fog wrapped around us like a secret, a cocoon made of air and memory. For a long time, we just breathed together. But peace has a way of testing its own strength. It happened one evening, near the end of August. The sky was red with the kind of sunset that looks like fire. The air was restless, wind shifting in strange directions. I'd stayed late again, brushing Storm's mane, humming softly. The barn lights cast golden pools on the straw. Then a car pulled up, a sleek black one that didn't belong here. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, then footsteps. A man in a clean jacket stepped into the barn, his shoes too polished for mud. "Evening," he said, his tone clipped, professional. "I'm looking for the stable manager." Paul appeared from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. "That'd be me." "Can I help you?" The man nodded curtly. "I'm here about the chestnut in stall 4. The one you call Storm." My heart dropped. Paul frowned. "What about him?" "I'm here on behalf of his previous owner," the man said. "They've located him through the rescue registry and are interested in reclaiming him." The words hit like thunder. Reclaiming. As if he were an object. A possession that could be taken back. Paul's tone hardened. "That horse was surrendered legally. Papers are signed and sealed. He's not for sale." "I understand," the man said coolly, "but they're willing to make an offer." I didn't hear the number. I didn't care. All I could hear was the pounding in my ears, the slow unraveling of everything that had kept me alive these past months. Paul glanced at me, then back at the man. "He's not leaving here," he said, voice low. "Not after what he's been through." The man gave a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." Then he turned and walked away, the echo of his steps fading into the hum of the crickets outside. When the sound of the car engine faded, I realized I was shaking. Paul placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "He's not going anywhere. Not if I can help it." But that night, as I stood by Storm's stall, I couldn't stop the dread from seeping in. He stood close to me, eyes calm, but I could feel his unease too. Animals always sense what we try to hide. I leaned against the wooden rail, whispering, "They can't take you. I won't let them." He lowered his head, resting it against my arm. His breath was warm, steady. but I could feel something trembling beneath his skin. A memory of fear, of cages and ropes. The rain began again, sudden and fierce, slamming against the roof like fists. I stayed with him until the thunder came and passed, whispering into the dark, promising things I didn't know if I could keep. The next few days were uneasy. The black car returned twice more, each time leaving without answers. Paul was furious but careful. The papers were in order, he said. Storm was legally his now, under the rescue's name. But the fear lingered like fog that wouldn't burn off. I found myself clinging to every moment, every breath, every sound, every shared silence. I'd stand with him in the field, the grass brushing against my legs, the air full of insects and sun. I'd trace the old scars on his side and think about how the past never really leaves us. It just learns to stay quiet until something shakes it awake. Storm started picking up on my restlessness. He'd lift his head when I grew still, nudge my shoulder with his muzzle. Sometimes he'd let out a low sound, not quite a whinny, more like a sigh. It was on one of those afternoons, heavy with tension, that I decided to take him riding beyond the ridge for the first time. Paul had given me quiet approval, though I saw the worry in his eyes. Storm had been doing well, but we'd never gone that far together. Still, I needed to breathe, to feel the world stretch around us again. The path up the hill was soft with mud, the trees whispering overhead. Storm moved carefully, his ears twitching with every new sound. I spoke to him softly, letting my voice fill the space between each breath. When we reached the top, the valley opened before us, endless green fading into blue haze. The wind pressed against my face, carrying the smell of pine and rain. Storm's ears flicked forward, his chest expanding with a deep, shuddering breath. "You see?" I whispered. "There's more than fences." We stayed there until the sun began to dip, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. For a few heartbeats, everything was still. I could feel his warmth beneath me, the rhythm of his breathing, the quiet peace that only comes when two lives forget where they end. And then, from somewhere far below, I heard an engine, faint but unmistakable. I turned. Down near the stables, a black car was parked by the gate. Storm shifted beneath me, sensing my tension. I whispered, "It's okay." But my voice betrayed the lie. We rode down slowly, carefully, my pulse hammering. By the time we reached the yard, the man was standing there again, talking to Paul. His hands moved sharply, gestures slicing through the air. Paul's face was tight, controlled. I stopped a few yards away, slid off Storm, and led him toward his stall. The man glanced in my direction, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he said finally, turning to leave. When the car disappeared beyond the road, Paul exhaled. "Persistent bastard," he muttered. Then, softer, "Don't worry. We'll keep him safe." I nodded, though my throat was dry. That night I stayed in the barn long after the others left. The moonlight spilled through the gaps in the roof, tracing pale lines along the floor. Storm stood close, his breath rising in quiet clouds. I rested my head against his neck. "I'm not losing you," I whispered. The silence answered back, heavy and alive. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, slow, deliberate, like the sky was holding its breath. I closed my eyes, listening. The world felt smaller again, folded under the sound of the storm. But somewhere deep inside, a defiance stirred, something wild and unyielding, born from the same fire that ran beneath his skin. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to hide. Not from them, not from the past, not from myself. Because love, even the kind you share with a creature who can't speak your language, demands courage. And courage, I was beginning to learn, often sounds like the quiet between thunder. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It came down like a curtain drawn tight over the world, muting everything, turning the fields into rivers, and the stables into a symphony of dripping, echoing sound. On the second night, the power went out. I sat in the barn with a single lantern burning beside me, its flame swaying every time the wind found a crack in the wall. The light made the shadows move, soft and alive. Storm stood in his stall, head lowered, half asleep, the steady rhythm of his breathing anchoring me to the present. Outside, the thunder rolled somewhere far away, the kind that rumbles rather than strikes, the sky grumbling in its sleep. I couldn't help but think that maybe the weather was trying to tell me something. Maybe the world was holding its breath with me, waiting. Paul had gone home hours ago, muttering something about the roads washing out. He'd told me to lock up and rest. I said I would, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black car, the gleam of rain on its windshield, the man's thin smile when he said this isn't over. I knew storms like that, the kind that didn't blow over easily. I leaned back against the wooden post, the smell of hay and damp leather wrapping around me like a blanket. Storm shifted, his hooves scraping softly against the floor. I whispered his name, and he turned his head toward me, eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. "I won't let them take you," I said. "I promise." He blinked slowly, the way he always did when he was calm. His breath filled the air between us, warm and steady. The truth was, I didn't know what I'd do if they came again. The papers said he was safe here, but money has a way of bending rules, and people with power have a way of taking what they want. But not this time. Not him. I stayed until the lantern burned low, until the rain softened into a whisper. Then I drifted into sleep right there on the straw, the sound of his breathing pulling me under like the tide. The morning came gray and heavy. I woke to the sound of the barn doors creaking open, light bleeding in from the fog outside. My body ached from sleeping on the floor, but I didn't move at first. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, strong and familiar. Paul's voice broke the silence. "You're persistent," he said gently. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Couldn't leave him. He smiled, tired but kind. "Didn't think you would." He handed me a steaming mug. The warmth soaked into my hands, chasing away the chill. For a moment, we just stood there, listening to the rain taper off. "Got a call this morning," he said after a while, his tone careful. "That man, the one from the other day, he's been pressing the rescue board. Claims he has new documentation. It's complicated." The words sank into me like stones. "What does that mean?" "It means they might send someone to investigate. Maybe tomorrow." I nodded slowly, staring into the coffee, watching the surface tremble. My reflection wavered, small and uncertain. Paul put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't lose hope, kid. Storm's got you. You've got him. That counts for something." When he left, the silence rushed back in. I walked to Storm's stall and pressed my forehead against the wood. My breath came out shaky, uneven. "We'll figure this out," I whispered. He turned his head, his eyes soft. There was something ancient in that gaze, a knowing older than words, older than fear. I felt it settle into me, that quiet strength that didn't need to roar to be real. That afternoon, the clouds began to thin. The fields glimmered under the weak sun, the puddles turning into mirrors. The barn doors groaned when I pushed them open, letting light spill across the straw. Storm stepped forward eagerly, snorting, his ears twitching. He was restless, full of that post-rain energy that comes from too much waiting. I smiled. "All right," I said. "Let's go see what the world looks like after everything falls apart." We walked out together, the mud squelching beneath our feet. The air was cold, sharp, and alive. The hills rolled out before us, shining under the returning light. When we reached the edge of the pasture, I unclipped the lead rope and stepped back. Storm hesitated for only a second before bolting forward, galloping through the wet grass, his mane a banner of fire and wind. I watched him move and thought of everything I'd lost, and everything I'd found because of that loss. How grief had led me here, how silence had turned into language, how love had grown in a place I never thought to look. Sometimes healing doesn't look like rebuilding. It looks like letting something wild breathe again. He ran until his breath came out in clouds, then slowed and turned back toward me, chest heaving. I could see the reflection of the sky in his eyes, endless, changing, free, I didn't realize someone else was watching until I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. When I turned, the black car was back. It idled near the gate, sunlight catching the chrome. The man stepped out, the same immaculate jacket, the same cold composure. He didn't belong in this landscape of mud and rain and honesty. I stepped forward before Paul could appear from the barn. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady but quiet. He studied me for a moment, then smiled thinly. "You must be the woman who's been spending so much time with him." I said nothing. He nodded toward the pasture. "You've done well with him." He's strong again. "But he's not yours." The words hit like glass. "He's not yours either," I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance maybe, or pity. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand enough." He sighed. "Look, I don't want to argue. My employer has sentimental attachment to that horse. They made a mistake letting him go. We're offering a fair deal, for everyone." Storm lifted his head at the sound of voices. Ears pricked, muscles tensing. I stepped closer to the man, close enough that I could see the rainwater beating on his sleeve. "He's not a deal. He's not a number. He's not going anywhere." Paul's voice cut through the air behind me. "She's right," he said, his tone hard. "You need to leave." The man's jaw tightened. He looked from Paul to me, then back to Storm. Something in his expression shifted. The smallest crack, a flicker of something human. Regret, maybe, but it passed. "You'll hear from us soon," he said finally, turning toward the car. I watched him drive away until the sound of the engine faded into the hills. For a long time, none of us spoke. The wind whispered through the wet grass, carrying the faint smell of rain. Paul exhaled slowly, rubbing his face. "We'll sort it out," he said, "one way or another." I nodded. But inside, something was unraveling. That night I couldn't stay away. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the world wrapped in silence. The stars came out, fragile, trembling lights scattered across the black. I walked to the barn alone, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Storm was awake, his head over the stall door. His eyes caught the light, glowing like twin embers. "Hey," I whispered. Couldn't sleep again. He stepped forward, brushing his nose against my shoulder. I stroked his mane, feeling the warmth of his body radiate through me. "They're going to come back," I said softly, "but I'm not letting them have you." I didn't know what plan was forming in my mind, only that I couldn't bear to lose him. He wasn't just a horse anymore. He was proof that I could still love something, still protect something, still matter. I led him out of the stall, the sound of his hooves echoing softly. The pasture shimmered under the starlight, silver and endless. The air was cool, clean, quiet. We walked together to the ridge, the same one we'd climbed before. The grass brushed against my legs, wet with dew. When we reached the top, I looked out at the valley below, the faint outline of the stables, the distant road, the thin mist rising from the earth. I pressed my hand to his neck. "This is yours," I said. "Not theirs, not anyone's. Yours." He turned his head slightly, his eye catching the moonlight. It was enough. We stayed like that for a long time, a woman and a horse, alone beneath a sky finally clear. The wind moved through the grass, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. The night was alive, but gentle. When I finally led him back to the barn, I felt something settle inside me. A decision, simple and absolute. If they came again, I'd be ready. They came at dawn. The sound of engines woke me. 2 cars this time, pulling up the gravel road, tires crunching through puddles. I ran outside before they could reach the gate. Paul was already there, his arms crossed, his jaw set. Behind the first man, the one in the black jacket, was a woman I hadn't seen before. She was older, maybe in her 50s, her expression drawn tight with something between guilt and longing. The man gestured toward her. "This is Mrs. Carter," he said. "Storm's former owner." She stepped forward, eyes scanning the pasture. When they landed on Storm, something in her face broke. "He looks so different," she whispered. Paul's tone was steady. "He's been through a lot. We all have. The woman nodded slowly. I can see that. I didn't move. I could feel Storm's gaze on me from across the field, patient, waiting. The man began to speak again, but Mrs. Carter lifted a hand, silencing him. She took a few steps toward me. You're the one who's been with him? Yes. My voice barely made a sound. She studied me for a long moment. Then quietly she said, He was my husband's horse. When he passed, I didn't have the strength to care for him. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting him go. But when I found out he'd been sent to the rescue, She stopped, swallowing hard. I just needed to know he was all right. Her words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like confession. I looked at her, the lines on her face, the way her hands trembled. And in that instant, my anger softened. Maybe pain doesn't have a single shape. Maybe loss makes cowards of all of us in different ways. I stepped aside, letting her see him fully. Storm lifted his head, ears pricking. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she whispered, almost to herself, He used to hate the rain. Something in my chest cracked open. He doesn't anymore. She smiled faintly, eyes wet. I can see that. The man shifted, uncomfortable. Mrs. Carter, we should... No, she interrupted. He's home. The silence that followed felt like sunrise breaking through clouds. She turned back to me. You'll take care of him? I already am. She nodded, her eyes bright with something like relief. Then she reached out, brushed her fingers along Storm's neck, just once, trembling, before turning away. The black car doors closed. Engines started. The sound faded into the distance. Paul let out a long breath. Well, he said quietly. I didn't see that coming. I couldn't answer. I was too busy crying, not the shattering kind this time, but the quiet kind that feels like the sky washing itself clean. Storm nudged me, his breath warm against my cheek. I pressed my hand to his muzzle, laughing through the tears. We did it, I whispered. He blinked slowly, calm and steady. The seasons changed. The storms came and went, softer now, more merciful. The hills turned gold, then green again. Life found its rhythm. I stayed. I worked the mornings, helped with the younger horses, learned the language of hooves and halters, the quiet rituals of care. Storm was always near, grazing by the fence, watching me with that same patient gaze that had saved me once. Sometimes in the stillness after rain, I'd sit by his stall and talk to him about everything I was too afraid to say to anyone else. The dreams, the grief, the strange, fragile joy of being alive. He'd listen, like always, breathing, silent, steady. And on nights when the sky turned dark and the thunder rolled across the hills, I no longer flinched. I'd stand at the doorway, the rain spilling down my hair and coat, and feel the storm moving through me, not against me, because that's what he taught me, that pain doesn't mean the end. Sometimes it's the beginning, the sound of something breaking just enough to let the light in. I used to think the rain was something to survive. Now I know it's something to stand beneath. Storm would look at me then, his eyes reflecting the lightning, calm and infinite, and I'd whisper into the storm, "We're all right. We're home." The rain would fall, soft and endless, and for the first time in my life, I'd let it.